I came here in January of 1971. I was hired to do extension programs on the tax issue. Specifically, how should we finance state and local government? And I proposed that the real issue was not that taxes were too high or too low, etc., but the real tax issue was what should the mix be to pay for government: property, sales, and income. What should the mix be between those three? We worked at that all through the early 70s, and the legislature solved it. And what we did, if you old-timers will recall, we reduced the property tax as a part of the mix, and we increased the sales, or rather the income tax. Now fast forward 40 years. Same issue. Same problem. What should the tax mix be to fund state and local government? And again, we have made a change. We have lowered the income tax, and so increasing property and sales taxes are inevitable. I hearken back to my days at Purdue when my old major professor gave me some great advice. And some of you will remember my old major professor. His name was Earl Butts. And he told his students, keep your old notes if you're dealing with public policy, because the same issue will eventually come around again. And if Earl was alive, I would have fun calling him and telling him how the tax issue has evolved over 40 years. Uncertainty. Uncertainty in the political economy of agriculture. These three brothers, as they became of drinking age, went to the local bar every Friday night. And then they all went off to college, and they developed their careers, and they moved to 3 different parts of the country. And one of the 3 ended up in a small country cowboy town as a country lawyer. And he would go into that bar every Friday night, and he would order 3 beers. And he would sip each one slowly. Well, finally the bartender got his curiosity up, and he says, I don't understand this. Why are you doing this? You would be much better off to just order 1 beer at a time. They would be fresher. And the old country lawyer laughed, and he said, well, my 2 brothers and I have made this deal that we were always going to drink together on Friday night. So in their hometowns, or rather where they live now, they are drinking 3 beers slowly. That reminds you of Washington, D.C. logic. And finally one night, this old country lawyer came in, only ordered 2 beers. Well, the bartender got worried. Obviously something terrible's happened. So he extended his sympathy. Then the country lawyers couldn't quite figure this out, and then he finally grinned and he said, oh, I get it. No, everybody's all right. No problem. You see, last Sunday, my wife coerced me into joining the Baptist church with her. I took a no-drinking pledge. But it doesn't apply to my 2 brothers. Now that is really DC logic. Economists have to have some charts. And if we're going to talk about uncertainty in the American economy, we need to start with this chart. This is all the activity, the gross domestic product of the American economy. As you can see, it is growing slowly. Most predictions for 2016 are 2%. How would you describe that? Well, you all remember fondly President Reagan, and he was a great wordsmith. And he invited the bishop from South Africa, some of you may remember him, Bishop Tutu, to spend some time at the White House. And when they walked out and faced the press, news reporter said, "Well, how did your meeting, Mr. President, go with Bishop Tutu?" And Reagan said, "So-so." That describes the American economy today. Why? I'm not going to place the blame at the foot of the economy, labor, management, etc. I'm going to place the blame squarely where it belongs, and that's in Topeka and Washington, at the feet of the politicians. The economy is guided by economic policy, and all policy is political. Economic growth would increase jobs and reduce the federal budget. If the economy was growing at 4%, we would have, at least on paper, full employment, and we would balance the federal budget. But this requires political certainty. In today's polarized society, extreme partisanship prevails. Politicians follow ideological doctrine, and the government has become dysfunctional. And the blame belongs on either extreme. When you follow ideological doctrine, you don't have to think. You just drink the Kool-Aid. And that's what's going on today. Ideological purity prevents democracy from functioning. The result is political uncertainty, which creates economic uncertainty, which means, number one, less ability to plan and invest. 2, less productivity. 3, less efficient employment of the factors of production. 4, less growth. 5, more volatility in the marketplace, especially with basic commodities like wheat, feed grains, and oilseeds, and petroleum. And number 6, all this uncertainty causes the cash to go to the safe haven, and so the value of the dollar is very strong, decreasing agriculture exports and producing a declining ag economy. Those are the facts. In the history of mankind, there has been 2 ways to govern, and only 2. One is compromise. 2 is ideological purity, which ends up in dictatorship. You govern by votes, or you govern by bullets. And what amazes me today is that these strict constitutionalists obviously have not ever read the Constitution. If they did, they didn't understand it. Let me tell you about the first compromise that made this great country what it is. It happened in a bar in my hometown, York, Pennsylvania, which was capital of the country at the time. And in that bar one night was Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. And they debated, and they drank. And by midnight they had settled it. You see, Hamilton wanted the capital in New York, and he wanted a central bank. Jefferson despised central banks, and he wanted the capital on the Potomac. And they did what it takes to make a democracy work, which we have forgotten how to do today. They compromised. Compromise is not a dirty word. It is how men and women of integrity and different values live in a civilized society. So what did we do? We put the capital on the Potomac, and we had a central bank. The problem today is that the wingnuts on either extremes would prefer not to compromise and to throw this weak economy into a tailspin. All the president and the Congress have been capable of doing is to kick the can down the road, and they may do it again the end of this week. We deserve better, and we should demand better. The deadline for the budget was September 30th, at the end of the fiscal year. So they passed another congressional resolution, which means they don't have the guts to make a decision. And so the day now, again, is December 11th. Are we going to shut the government down once again? We going to pass another continuing resolution? Or are we going to have the guts to make policy? We passed a budget deal right before the former speaker left. And it is completely understood. It's a budget deal only. There is not $1 of appropriation in it. That is very significant to agriculture. A case in point of how dysfunctional we are. It took us 3 years to pass a farm bill. 3 years. To pass the basic policy for agriculture for 5 years. Clearly, this was the most difficult farm bill in my lifetime. And no, I did not, as Senator Roberts likes to say, help Calvin Coolidge write the first farm bill. However, there is a great Coolidge story which I love to tell. Some of you probably have been at the Beltsville Agricultural Experiment Station just north of Washington. Well, Calvin and Grace Coolidge toured that station one afternoon, and this story is well documented. They divided into two groups, and Coolidge led one group and the First Lady the other. Coolidge was a very quiet, conservative, logically thinking gentleman, and he would love to respond to questions with 2 words. A news reporter said to him one time, "I have a bet with you, or with my editor, that I can get you to say more than 2 words. Coolidge grinned and said, "You lose." The First Lady's group stopped at the chicken coop, and Mrs. Coolidge didn't have the same problem that the president had. She talked frequently. And she was very curious, and she said to the young man, "How many times a day does the rooster mate?" Well, that question, that's a little bit sticky for a young man to answer for the First Lady, but he looked at her and he said, "Well, many, many times a day." She said, "When the president comes by, would you please explain that to him?" President comes by, the young man explained it to him, said the First Lady wanted him to do that, and Coolidge, true to form, cocked his head and grinned and said, "Same hand." And the young man said, "No, many different hens." And Coolidge broke his rule of thumb and said, "Let's find her and explain that to her." Why did it take 3 years to pass a farm bill? It was the worst of times to pass a farm bill. Government broke, basically, and record net farm income. As you can see, when we were passing the 2014 Farm Bill, which was supposed to be the 2012, we were at record U.S. net cash farm income. And you can see what's happened since. The next chart, you can see what our record has been on government payments. If you go back to the year 2000, we had a record over $30 billion. And now the estimate for 2015 is $4.6 billion. It's going to cost about $6.5 billion. But I would argue we'd have done our share. If every other government program was cut this much, we'd have a surplus. And then, of course, here's the problem. I just love this chart. There's lots of interesting information in it, and it's got lots of room for good stories. This is the federal budget deficit. The red ink to my left is Papa Bush. The red ink to my right, the first part is Junior Bush. And then the last 6 years, is Barack Obama. Now, in the middle, that's supposed to be black, but it's coming through, I think, as blue. You put red and blue on the same chart, you get purple. So, but that's black. Those 4 years of surplus. Who was that? William Jefferson Clinton. If you wouldn't know better, you'd think that was payoff for his moral, upstanding behavior, you see. Now, how did we get that surplus? Remember Papa Bush? Read my lips? No new taxes? The Republican in the White House and the Democrat in the Congress compromised. They raised taxes and cut spending, set Clinton up to balance the budget. That's how you govern. Now, on this Farm Bill debate we had in 2014, true to form, the Congress couldn't agree on what the safety net should be. Should it be a price safety net or a revenue safety net? And so what they did was create something called PLC and ARC and pass the buck to you, and you had to make a guess. We at K-State tried to help you do that. But it's a clear case of congressional and executive irresponsibility again. Now, it's no-brainer. At least theoretically, if you want to put a strong safety net under farm income, that safety net must be based on revenue, not just price. Price is actually backward. We have a widespread drought. You don't have anything to sell, you're in trouble. Price rises above the reference price, and you get a payment. Then on the other hand, we have a great year. Abundance. Prices are low, but you have something to sell, you'll make some money. Prices fall below target, and you get a payment. Very interesting. In this Farm Bill debate, once again, we fought the Civil War. Now, that's our fault. That isn't the politicians' fault. The North-South battle, the battle between wheat, feed grains, and oil seeds, and rice, peanuts, and cotton, almost derailed the bill at the very end. I was asked the other day, what is the distinct difference on ag policy today compared to when I started in this business? When I started, the motto among farm state congressmen was farmers first and parties second. Remember those Dan and Pat shows we used to do? Glickman and Roberts? Today, it's party first and you second. That's the problem.